You're listening to the Sisters in Loss podcast, a faith-based grief and loss podcast for Black women, where you will hear stories of miscarriage, infant loss, stillbirth, and infertility to learn there is a testimony in tragedy. You will learn how to heal, gain clarity, find hope and peace, and turn your pain into your purpose after loss. I'm your host, Erica M. McAfee. Welcome to episode 145 of the Sisters in Loss podcast. I know that many of us are at home quarantined due to COVID-19, also known as the coronavirus. This is a season of uncertainty, which can bring on lots of anxiety and fears and bouts of grief for us. But I hope that these podcast episodes during this month will bring you a sense of joy, hope, and peace as you continue on your own personal fertility journey and journey to motherhood. As you all know, this month is National Infertility Awareness Month, and there is a National Infertility Awareness Week that is coming up at the end of the month. But I would love to kick off Black Maternal Health Week talking about fertility challenges. And today's guest has been through just that. Today's guest is Monique Farook. She's an infertility survivor, former NICU mom, wife, and a serial entrepreneur. Monique experienced a right tubal blockage, and she had an unsuccessful IUI, or intrauterine insemination. She waited 4 long years before seeking the expertise of another reproductive endocrinologist, only to find out that she was diagnosed with a hormonal disease called hypothyroidism and uterine polyps. She then began her quest for her journey to motherhood by going through an IVF treatment, but that did not come without any trauma. She birthed her baby at 24 weeks, going into premature labor, where she experienced some hemorrhaging post-birth. Her baby boy spent 4 months in the NICU. And in today's episode, she's going to take us back on that journey. What is it like to birth a premature baby? What was the grief like as she went through this IVF treatment? The trauma post-delivery with the hemorrhaging and blood transfusion she had to receive, and her new podcast we've partnered with this week called Infertility Me, where she shares stories about people's and expertise journey through infertility challenges. So without further ado, here is Monique Farook. Well, thank you so much, Monique, for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Erica, for having me. It's truly a pleasure and an honor to be with you today and discussing infertility.
Yes. So I would love for you to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself and what you do.
So I am currently a work-from-home mom. Before conceiving my son, I ran takeout restaurants with my husband. I've been doing that for about 10 years now. We've been together for 11, and we've been married for 9. And like I said, I'm a stay-at-home mom now, and we live in Prince George's County, Maryland. I'm originally from Maryland, born and raised. And so we didn't know that we were infertile until 2 years after the journey began, until 2 years after we got married.
Wow. So yeah, take us back on your infertility journey and share with us your journey to motherhood.
So we were married for 2 years before I was diagnosed with infertility. And it just started dawning on me, like, I'm not getting pregnant. And we had been together at the time for 4 years. And when we got married, I had been off of birth control for a year and a half. I would say this is 2012 when I went to the RE for the first time to get checked and to see if there was anything physically going on with my body or anything internally. I had never been pregnant before. We went to the RE and I was diagnosed through the HSG testing, where they use the liquid dye to check your fallopian tubes and your ovaries. And I was diagnosed with right tubal blockage. And from there, we did IUI. Because I was about 29 at the time, they didn't feel it was necessary to do a full IVF treatment cycle. So we started with IUI. It was unsuccessful. And then we stopped and we never tried anything again. I never got a second opinion on the right tubal blockage. We just kind of put it on the back burner. We really weren't ready to deal with it emotionally. And we kind of just walked around with this elephant on our backs, and we just, continued to run our businesses, and we were working like crazy 7 days a week and building a life together. And it wasn't until 4 years later, 2016, before we went back to see a RE again, because nothing was happening, not even an ectopic, not anything. So at this time, I'm going on 32 in 2016, spring of 2016. That's like the short version of everything as far as leading up to my actual IVF cycle treatments.
Yeah, take us through the next steps in the whole IVF process for you.
So when I went to the clinic, it's in Virginia, it's called Dominion Fertility. They've been around a long time, and I heard about them on the radio, actually. And so I had another HSG test done. This time, the right tubal blockage was not there. It had cleared itself. I'm assuming that it may have been tissue or mucus of some sort, and it just kind of cleared itself out. And it can happen from time to time with women and their menses, and some of the crazy things that the body goes through. And so I was diagnosed then, though, with hypothyroidism, which is a hormonal disorder, and I wasn't producing enough of the thyroid hormone to work with my reproductive system. And so that's part of the reason I wasn't getting pregnant as well. But I kind of feel like that was something that was developed within those 4 years, because it didn't come up positive the first time when I had the right tubal blockage 4 years prior. And then I also had developed uterine polyps. And so I had to have those removed in June, before my first IVF cycle was in July. And I did natural cycle IVF, which is a less medicated form of IVF. And you have to qualify by being under 35 and getting your periods on a regular basis every month without any complications, as far as sometimes, some people have like PCOS, and so they won't have periods for like 40 days at a time. And so as long as your periods are natural and regular, you qualify for it. And so that is what we opted for. The first time in July, after I had my procedure done to remove the uterine polyps and to be on medication for 3 months for the hypothyroidism, we did our first egg retrieval, and that was successful, but the embryo and the sperm did not fertilize. And so that was technically an unsuccessful cycle. And then the second time was in August, and the egg transfer got through the retrieval process. Everything was going great. They only remove one egg at a time to fertilize. They don't do more than one, like heavier medicated IVF cycles, to prevent twin pregnancies and more high-risk pregnancy. And that was successful. We conceived. I got the call 2 weeks later, after going to have my blood work done, that we were pregnant. My numbers were really high, almost at 1,000. A couple days later, I went back and they were through the roof. So there was no concern. And that brings me to August of 2016, when my son was conceived, and he was born January 2017.
So how was your pregnancy with him? Did you have any other complications once you were released from your fertility clinic, or did you just have a normal pregnancy?
No, it's the pregnancy, the experience of pregnancy altogether was for the most part okay. But when I got to 14, right before my 14 weeks, I was like 13 weeks and 5 days, I started having some light bleeding. And it began on a Friday night, very late, and I had to take myself to the hospital. My husband hadn't come home yet from the restaurant, and so I had to get myself to the hospital, which was about a 20-minute ride. And they did a full workup to make sure that the baby was okay, that my sac hadn't ruptured, that I wasn't previa, where the sac covers like the cervix and causes more complications. So I was okay. And that was the last time I had any sort of complication up until the week before I gave birth, and prematurely. He was 24 weeks gestation when he was born. And the night that I went to the hospital and was put on bed rest, it was again another Friday. I was 23 weeks and 4 days. And it was late at night again on a Friday. I started bleeding, and I took myself to the hospital. When I got there, they were telling me I was about like 2 to 3 centimeters dilated. And then once I was at Southern Maryland Hospital in Prince George's County, and I had to be rushed to Washington Hospital Center in DC, about 30 minutes away, because that particular hospital wasn't a level 4 hospital, and they could not care for someone going into premature labor, and they didn't have a NICU set up for that level of care. And so I had to be rushed over there in an ambulance, and I was on bed rest for a whole week before he came. And he came inaugural Friday, 2017. And I was in the hospital room, and I was having contractions and didn't know what it was. I thought it was Braxton Hicks, because prior to me going into premature labor, my muscles were already starting to work themselves, and I knew what the Braxton Hicks felt like. And so that's what I thought I was having. I was on the phone with my grandmother, and I was sitting on the bed, and I just started having these like slight little muscle spasms in my stomach, and I could feel the baby kicking, so I knew that he was okay. But then when I went to the bathroom a few minutes later, I urinated, and then after that, I just began to feel like this bulge coming out of my vagina. And when I looked down, I could see my sac hanging from the very outer area of my vagina. And I got up, I ran back to the bed, I pushed that button and told the nurses the baby's coming, my sac is bulging, and he's on the way. And they came rushing in, immediately went into the OR. I had just enough time to call my husband, who had just left like an hour before, and to call my mom and my dad and let them know that he was coming. And it was just a wild ride. I still have images in my head. I'll never forget it. It was a wild experience. And I'm just so blessed and fortunate that we both came out of it alive, So I wake up, and of course, the first thing I asked is, where's my baby? Did he make it? Was he alive? He was only 24 weeks, 4 days. And although he was at viability, it's still very extremely scary, especially after having had him through infertility and going through all of the emotions of infertility and the anxieties and fears surrounding infertility. And so having this baby so early, it just brought on more fear and more worry and more anxieties. And I just didn't know what to expect when I walked in that NICU at all. So that was a really tumultuous time for us.
Today's podcast is brought to you by a partnership with today's guest, Monique Farook, who is the founder and host of the Infertility and Me podcast. Infertility and Me provides a loving and judgment-free zone for women and men experiencing infertility, infant loss, miscarriage, and so much more. They speak freely about infertility through personal stories, a supportive community, and helpful resources. No matter where you are in your infertility or fertility journey, it is Infertility and Me's desire to connect and heal together with you. So join me and you if you're listening to this episode, whether it's in Apple Podcasts or Google Play or Stitcher or iHeartRadio. Join me in subscribing and downloading weekly the Infertility and Me podcast. They come out every Friday of every week. Do not miss it. Infertility and Me, definitely remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. I can't imagine. So how long did he spend in the NICU?
He was there for 129 days, AKA 4 months. Probably the longest 4 months I've ever experienced. And when I look back on it now, it's like, darn it, it went by so fast because he's 3 now. It was the longest 4 months I could have ever imagined. It's only by the grace of God and the Creator that we even survived those 4 months. And just watching him grow and waking up every day, immediately calling the hospital before I get there to make sure that he had a good night and that nothing happened and that he didn't, nothing happened to him. We had some scares in the beginning, especially when he was first born. That first week, they had to put a tube into his arm, right underneath his armpit, into his lung on the left side, because there was a pocket of air that wasn't releasing itself. And so that tube was releasing that air that was stuck. And because his lungs weren't fully developed when he was born, something happened. And it was just this air sitting there that shouldn't have been there. And so he has like his little battle scar, from that. And then, of course, he had multiple transfusions, lots of those. He was on the oscillating machine for about 2 months, intubated for about 2.5 months. And by the time we left, he was lifting his head and talking and, squirming around and letting us know that he was, physically okay. We just still didn't know if he had any mental delays or anything like that. And, I just, it just took a lot of praying, a lot of meditation, a lot of just trying to stay grounded in all my belief systems and doing things for self-care that allowed me that time to decompress. And although I was still pumping on 3-hour schedule and trying to get him to latch while he was in the hospital, still trying to be a wife to my husband as much as I could, and trying to cater to his needs as a new father that didn't know anything about what it was going to be like for his son and for his wife. Because after I gave birth a week later, I was at home and I started hemorrhaging. And so I was in the hospital for, like 4 days after that. I had fever, I had blood transfusions. So it was a lot that happened. I didn't know if I was going to make it. I didn't know if he was going to make it. It was a lot. But he spent 4 months in the hospital before coming home. He had just turned 4 months. It was a week past his original due date, which was May 8th.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you went back to the hospital for hemorrhaging. Was that due to something that happened during your C-section, or do you think it was due to your other condition that you have with hypothyroidism?
It was due to some placental tissue still in my uterus. It wasn't a very large amount from what the doctors told me, but there was enough for it to cause me to get sick, to hemorrhage, and to get, fevers and needed blank. I had lost so much blood. It was ridiculous. And so I had to have emergency D&C. And after I came out of the D&C, I had a high fever. And so they kept me for about 4 days. And then once I was released, I still couldn't get back to the hospital to see the baby because they wanted me to stay home a couple more days to make sure that I didn't have a fever going back into the NICU. And his NICU is very, very strict, like most other NICUs, about, sicknesses, fevers, and such. They all knew what was going on. They keep note of every little thing that happens to the babies in the NICU. And they keep note of when you call. They keep note if anything happens to the mom, if anybody else is visiting the baby. And so I just had to keep them in the loop, and my husband would have to call and let them know what was going on with me and such. And my mom would call if my husband didn't, to check on the baby and make sure he was okay too. And he was still so small. So, most of the time he was just sleeping during that time. It was in the first 2 weeks of his life. So, but getting back to that NICU was all I could think about. So I just had to remain strong and fight my way through everything and not give up, to be honest. Really, whew. Just thinking back on it, man, I get emotional. It's crazy.
Yes, I definitely can attest to a NICU experience.
Yes.
So really take us and tell us about just the trauma that you and the grief that you went throughout this process. A traumatic birth experience, going through hemorrhaging after your delivery, and then having to experience a 4-month NICU stay. How did you really process everything that you went through? Did you go to therapy, prayer? Just really share with us how you process all that trauma, because a lot of people listening to this podcast really have gone through very similar experiences, very high risk, definitely had their own fertility challenges, and can you share with us?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it was just having my husband's reassurance a lot of freaking prayer, man. I'm telling you, a lot of that. My mom, my dad, my sister, my husband, that's all that's here in Maryland for us. And everybody else lives a couple of states away or whatever. And so just them checking on me and connecting with me and staying connected with me when I didn't want to be connected and I just wanted to go into my shell and be quiet. I didn't want to talk. They made me talk. They made me cry, they gave me space and they held space for me to do those things in the midst of all of it. And without them and without the grace of God, I know there's no way that we would have survived as a married couple and as a family going through all of this. And I did a lot of prayer, like I said, a lot of meditations. And I had to learn to self-heal because at the end of the day, I couldn't allow postpartum depression and the trauma of the birth and the trauma of whether he was going to stay alive and me having the hemorrhaging and stuff, fear and anxiety because I was now a mother to a baby outside of the womb. And so that baby needed me. That baby needed my strength. That baby needed my love. That baby needed all of the good things that I could offer. Fighting for his life in that NICU was all the hope that I needed and all of the certainty that I had that we could get through it as a family, no matter what happened. As long as he kept breathing and he kept fighting and he was taking his breast milk and he wasn't, rejecting the breast milk. And that was the other thing that I had to deal with is he going to even take my breast milk? I've been sick. I've had some medications go through my system. Am I eating right enough? Am I getting enough sleep? Of course not. But, those thoughts still run through your mind and just holding on to, I would just go in the bathroom and cry coming out of the NICU or taking a break and going to eat in the hospital and just saying, God, I know you didn't bring us this far for us to lose this baby or to lose this battle. And so I just had to keep reminding myself, it's allowing people to love on me. I love to give love, but for me to allow people to love me the way that they need, that they know how, and just being there for me. I'm a very independent person. So I had to allow my family and I had to allow my husband, to give me that space and that opportunity to express my voice, express my feelings and express my grief and express my anxieties and help me heal. Because if I didn't heal, there's no way when he came home, I would have been able to adapt as a new mom with a new baby and not knowing the circumstances of what was in the future for him physically or mentally.
Absolutely. And obviously, baby boy is fine. He is, no delays. He is healthy and thriving 3-year-old, which is amazing and it's such a blessing.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm so happy for you that everything worked out because, like you mentioned, having a 24-weeker, almost 25-weeker, most babies don't make it out the NICU. So God definitely had his hands on your baby as you were going through this journey. So I would love for you, because you are also a fellow podcaster, to share with us about your podcast so that my listeners can definitely go check you out.
Yeah, so it's called Infertility and Me. And I titled it Infertility and Me because even though you go through infertility with your spouse and with your loved one and with your significant other, it's still an individual experience as a woman, especially being the one with the diagnosis. And so when I made the podcast, I knew I wanted to do something to give back to the community of men and women suffering as I had. And it took me up until the time he turned 2 years old to develop it and to really just take my time and process what needed to be done because I wanted to be of service and I wanted to do it from a place of love and give people the space to share their journeys and to allow doctors and other experts in the niche of fertility to come on and share their knowledge and wisdom and everything that they could offer listeners and just give everyday people a voice to release and to help them further heal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that. And you all definitely go check her out. I made sure I'll link her podcast in the show notes. Definitely go subscribe and leave a review once you listen to a few episodes. Also, I would love to know any tools or resources that you've used to help you on your fertility journey. Um, I know you mentioned about the hypothyroidism, just any tools that you've used that's helped you on your journey to motherhood.
Yeah, so I had to, for the hypothyroidism, because it causes foggy brain syndrome and it makes it difficult to lose weight. I have to do limit. I have to make sure that I eat properly and eat a diet rich in iron. And also, I do long walking in my neighborhood. I usually do about 2 miles a couple times a week. And when it's a little bit warmer, I'll do longer, and I'll go more often. And I love to swim, so I keep my body in shape. Keeping your body in shape when you're in preparation to conceive, or if you're coming out of an IVF cycle, is so important to detox the body, to keep your body strong, keep your heart strong. Your heart is a muscle. If you don't use it, it's not going to be strong. And so that's important. And staying physically active for me helps me with caring for my son, because he is a toddler, and they're getting so many things. And I'm a little older than say somebody 25, 28 years old having a baby. And so I have to make sure my energy level is up for him. And then with the hypothyroidism, I get fatigued very easily, and it doesn't take much. And so I have to eat a proper diet. I indulge in the things that I like, but for the most part, I keep it simple and I keep it healthy. And I limit, any alcohol usage and things like that. And as far as coping mechanisms, you have to find what works for you and based on your core values. If you're a Christ believer, staying grounded in the teachings of Christ and in your church or your organization that you are connected with. If you like to incorporate meditation, do that. If you like to incorporate other mindful activities, such as going outside and just being in the environment of God's creation, are all things that work for me. But people have to really look at themselves individually and find what soothes their soul the most. Music is another thing for me. Just having some time to myself, and without any distractions, without my husband's distractions, without anybody's distractions, taking a bath at night after I put the baby down, something simple like that. I like to keep the routine simple and so that it's something that I can incorporate into everyday life and not have to feel stressed out about finding a babysitter and all those things like that. And so utilizing your space at home is important for those kinds of things, whether you're going into treatment, coming out of treatment, or healing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, what encouraging words can you leave with the listeners, those women who are going through their own fertility challenges?
Just know that you're not alone, and it sounds really cheesy and people say it all the time, especially on social media communities. But it's the absolute truth. And I was that silent sufferer, going through this thing. And when I was going through it, infertility communities on Instagram weren't as big as they are now. And they certainly weren't as brown as they are now, and it's still nowhere near where it could be if we take the time to really go into a community that knows what we're going through. When I created the Instagram page, it was in lieu of the podcast that was coming, that I was making, but I just wanted to be that representation, part of the representation of brown skinned women. And so know that you guys are not alone, and know that you do not have to silently suffer. There is a major difference in talking to someone who has been where you are, or who is currently going through what you are going through, than someone in your family or in your close circle who's never had that experience. There's a level of connection that's different, and feeling like you're not alone in the journey. And sometimes when family listen to you and friends listen to you, they're listening to you, but they don't really know what to say. They don't know how to respond. And so it's different. So I encourage everyone to, to add yourself to groups like Erica's on Facebook, or on Instagram, getting involved in the community. And if you don't want to show your face, don't show your face. There's a lot of anonymous accounts that are going through infertility, but they're there and they're watching, and they're feeling the like they're not alone. And so know that you are capable of getting through it. And it is just a part of your life. It is not who you are. It does not define you as a man or a woman. It is just part of your journey. And no matter what happens, know that you are more than capable of getting through to the other side, no matter what that looks like.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Monique, for being on the podcast and sharing your story with us.
Thank you, Erica, so much for having me. It's truly a pleasure to have been able to connect with you on the podcast.
Absolutely. And definitely more stuff to come collaboratively in the future since we'll be close by each other.
Yes.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. For show notes and more information on today's guest, go to sistersinlost.com. If you have not joined our online community, go to sistersinlost.com as well as sign up for our newsletter. We want you to be a part of the community so you can know all of the events that we have planned on as Sisters in Lost. Go to sistersinlost.com, sign up for our newsletter, join our online community, and stay connected with us. Talk to you soon.